This is one of the most special Eames Lounge Chairs and Ottomans, respectively, primarily because of this swiveling Ottoman. So the rundown here is that this is one of the earliest production examples. It's an early 1956 lounge chair, an Ottoman, 670 and 671 is the model number, 670, 671. Notably, this has boot glides on the feet. So these things do not adjust, they aren't threaded, instead they're slip-on glides. And as I've learned from scholars and individuals like Daniel Ostroff over the years, there are a number of reasons why, from a functional standpoint, these details no longer exist on the current production examples, or even from those from the late 50s and early 60s. The reason I'm looking at those is because it helps to give a sense of when the pieces were made. Unlike a lot of other pieces of furniture that may be dated, like Fritz Hansen would put a date on all of their pieces, with Eames Lounge Chairs and Ottomans and a lot of other Eames and Herman Miller furniture, you have to use the details as well as the labels, if they still have them, to identify when they were made.
Talk to us about some of the other details on here.
A few things. As far as the most special stuff, I'll go kind of from most special to most general. The most special thing is that it swivels, which was only found on examples, some have argued in the first month of production, some have argued the first few hundred that were made, but regardless, this was discontinued very soon after the Eames Lounge was introduced. And these were made in California at the Eames office or from Evans Plywood, that's a little unclear, but not at the Herman Miller production facility in Michigan until later. These have a cast aluminum base, but they also have, if you look underneath here, it has about an 1/8-inch gap between the shaft or the kind of vertical piece of black steel here and the cast aluminum base, so that basically it shows that there's a mechanism there. In addition to that, the boot glides, let's say you bought one and it doesn't have any glides at all. The way that you can tell that it's from this early era is that it doesn't have any, it's not drilled, it's not threaded in the cast aluminum base. So if you looked underneath those boot glides, it would just be a flat surface without any holes. The boot glides there imply roughly 1956 production. So not necessarily just the first month, but let's say the first year, okay? So that would be if you had an example without the swiveling Ottoman, but with boot glides, it would still be a very early production. Now the next thing would be, when I look underneath here, I will see either 2 or 3 screws. If you have an example made, let's say at the latest from 1959 or later, maybe 1960 or later, it's going to have 2 screw holes closer together all the way up until today. This one has 3, some late 50s examples without boot glides also have 3 screws under here, but that's another kind of significant note as far as production era. Another thing to note, which I forgot about, more important than the screw holes underneath, is that the base on the chair actually was derived from a contract table base made in approximately 1955. That had 1/8-inch, 832, 1/8-inch with 32 threads per inch, glides on the feet of the chair. They changed that also very soon along with the swivel Ottoman characteristics because the threads were so weak that when people would use them, it would bend the threads and then people would complain. So they upgraded these to a thicker 1/4-inch thread on the feet of the chair. So that takes us now to like 57. So if we're now in like a 1957 or 58 production, we will no longer have a swiveling Ottoman, we will no longer have boot glides, we will no longer have the 1/8-inch threads on the chair base, and furthermore, a couple years after that, we will no longer have 3 screws under the armrests, we'll have 2. The next bit is the clips and the cushions. So the clips and the cushions on this chair, if we remove this, we're going to see that we have some round clips. We're also going to see a backing that's kind of like a cardboard material. And we're going to feel this leather, which is a very kind of thin glove leather, and it's a down-filled or feather-filled cushion. Those cushions, these clips, were used from 1956, the earliest production, pretty much, all the way up to 1971. And you'll see that style of clip. If you had a crazy early rare before this example, there's a different type of rectangular clip that actually function the same way with the same style cushion attachment. Some of those actually instead had buttons, more buttons instead of this clip. So if you have one of those, that's exciting. We've had one example like that are on our website. However, for the most part, from 56 to 1971, you'll see this clip and this kind of down or feather-filled cushion. In addition to that, you'll also notice that there is rosewood grain, both on the inside and outside of the panels here. And that was used from 1956 all the way up until 1990, when rosewood was Brazilian rosewood, which is what was used, was put on the endangered species list. From 1990 forward, they then introduced walnut and cherry as options, and later, closer to 2006, they reintroduced something called palisander, which is a sustainable type of rosewood. It was their way of saying, we want rosewood to come back, but we want to do it more responsibly. Okay, so what other details do we have here? If we had an example produced after 1971, the cushions would be less like this, not a feather-filled cushion. It would instead be filled with foam fiber fill. And then later in the 90s, a more solid like piece of foam, so it looks more like a pillow or a marshmallow. There are a couple of little nuanced details as far as hardware. When I look at an early example and I'm trying to date it, I can actually look at the threads of the screws and the color and the finish and the head type and get a sense roughly of production. Otherwise, there are a couple of things that are interesting. The casting was changed slightly, not the shape, but the finish. So their paint changed a bit over time after the 1970s, and also the shock mounts used on the back here. So I'm going to turn this around. The shock mounts that were used on the back, these are made of rubber, and that was done also until 1971. After that, those were made of a kind of hard plastic. We see the lovely Brazilian rosewood grain. This is all original. All in all, there's a lot to absorb as far as what goes on with the Eames Lounge. We're happy to answer any questions, guide you in the right direction, and we always have a selection of them at rarefy.co.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, Jeremy.